spend with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
A number of years ago, I wandered into a bookstore and saw this book, $2. And I bought it. And the title of the book is The Most Important Book That's Ever Been Written. And I bought it, and I thought, wow, I've got the most important book ever written. But if it's so important, why was it in a throw-out bin? Why was it in a discount bookstore? Could it be people didn't really understand the dynamics of this particular book? So I bought it, and several years ago, I preached a sermon on it. And I put it on my bookshelf because I looked at it as nothing more than a prop. But then, shortly after I preached that sermon, I took it out and looked at it. And there were some interesting things in it, but nothing earth-shattering. So I stuck it back on my bookshelf. And I went to look for it today. And I couldn't find it. Somebody stole my most important book ever written. But that's okay. If they want it, all the better for them. Or maybe when I was getting rid of books the other day, I threw it away. But that's okay too. But indulge me. And let's pretend. I have this great book. It's yellow in cover. See it? It says that it's the most important book that's ever been written. But this is the most important book ever written. And for that one to tout that, to claim that, is basically saying the Bible's not relevant. And that's what a lot of people have done over the years. The Bible is antiquated. That society has moved beyond so many of the things that are addressed in the Scriptures. And quite honestly, that's just not true. The Bible remains relevant to this day as much as it was 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and so on. The Bible's relevancy, its power, its verve, contains everything that we need. Well, in fact, that's what Peter writes in 2 Peter, the first chapter, and verse 13. That God, through his divine power, has granted to us everything. Stop. Think on that word. Everything. All-encompassing. Everything pertaining to life and godliness. If you go to Costco, you go down the spice aisle, you got all sorts of different spices. And then you find one that's in a bottle. And it said everything spice. I think that's what it says. Anyways, Linda bought it. And it's supposedly all the spices that go into the everything bagel. Joy would not like it. It's got garlic, it's got onions, all the things good people like. Not implying she's not a good people. But it's everything. And so I was looking at it the other day, and I go, I bet it doesn't have. And I looked at the ingredients, it's got it. Well, does it have? It's got it. So when you begin to think about life and godliness, that the Bible has to deal with everything as relates to an approach to him, you go, okay, that's a given. But what about life? Yes. Yes, it does. And that's what we're going to look at today. the relevancy of the scriptures. For one to even contemplate, speculate, it's lost its relevance. Because one is then calling into question God's knowledge. The fact that he's omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Omni means all. Life refers to our physical relationships, our well-being, and our spiritual well-being. All things pertaining to life and godliness. So let's begin looking at it, begin talking about it, and beginning to see if indeed it does. One of the things that unfortunately has plagued mankind for millennia is racism. Not just in this country, but in every country that has ever existed. And quite honestly, it's still going on now. And it's not just because between those that are Caucasian and or African American or Hispanic or whatever. But even today, you can see anti-Semitism on the rise. And it really ought not to be that way. There should be no looking down. There should be no distinction made in our minds. But it troubles me greatly. I look at the division in our nation, and it ought not to be there. How do we overcome it? How do we get back to that normalcy of people being people? You look at the scriptures, and you see what they have to say. Galatians 3:28, we looked at it on Wednesday night a little bit. There's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free man, for all one in Christ Jesus. And for those that are anti-Semites, I think they're anti-Semites because right now it is a political expedient. If you're on a college campus and you want to be part of the cool kids, you stand in opposition to Judaism. That's what you stand opposed to. When I went to college, you stood opposed to the war in Vietnam. You stood opposed to authority. You stood opposed to anything and everything. That's what you did. Or that's what I did. And you thought, oh man, I'm going to make a change in the world. But that's not what it's about. You've got to be informed. And yes, I stood and spoke out about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and all the other things. I had a knowledge on the surface. And all my friends were impressed. But those that knew a little bit more, less so. And that's what's happening today. People really don't understand the dynamics. It's about sovereignty. What's going on right now with Iran and Israel and those lined up against Israel. It's not biblical in its concept because God has fulfilled all prophecy regarding Israel. It has. Even back into the book of Judges, talked about all the land promises fulfilled. But what's going on now is political. What's going on now is hatred. Absolute hatred over a people. And if we would get back to just following the scriptures and allowing each one to coexist, that doesn't mean I'm going to say that religiously they're right or politically they're right. But it does say that we can coexist. Look over at Colossians, the 3rd chapter, and drop down with me into verse 11. Colossians 3:11. And again, remember, Paul is writing this letter to people he's never met before. He only learns about them through Epaphras. So in verse 11, a renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, and free man. But Christ is all and in all. Where did we ever get the idea that we have the right to look down on anyone else? Ever. One of the reasons I did not like South Carolina. I love the state. I love some of the people there. It's beautiful. The brethren there are wonderful. But when I saw the rejection of people that were struggling, that were looking for help, and that nobody was willing to step up, and I said to myself, why? And I stepped up. Not only I, but about 20 or 30 others. But it was pretty evident why. Civil War has been fought a long time ago, and we ought not be going down those roads. So the Bible addresses racism. Bible addresses the hatred in our heart, because that's really what it is. And it ought not to be there. Go over to the book of Acts, 10th chapter. Drop down about verse 34. And remember, I think it's kind of ironic, but the Jews in the first century were highly prejudicial. James even talks about distinction, about a rich man coming into your meeting. That's another type of preferential treatment. But look at the 10th chapter. Peter goes to the household of Cornelius, and he's directed there by a vision from God. He takes with him witnesses, because he knows that the minute it's found out back in Jerusalem that he had gone and visited a Gentile, the fur was going to fly. And so he goes with witnesses. Here's what he finds, or here's what's said in chapter 10, and go down to about verse 34. Opening his mouth, Peter said, "Most assuredly, I now understand that God is not one to show partiality, but in every nation, the man who fears him, does what is right, is welcome to him." The operative there is does what is right. In every subsection of society, there are people that do wrong. But we don't hold it against everyone else that are of that ethnicity. We don't. And we can't. If we're going to be pleasing in the sight of God, we come together as one. And that is one of the things that was a motivator for me to move back to California. Yes, I'm one of the crazy ones. I moved back to California. And because of the reason of acceptance. We had a young man live with us many, many years ago. And he was teaching Chinese people, ESL. He's a student at Cal State Northridge. and a member of the church. And when he graduated, I said, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay here? And he goes, no. He said, I'm not staying here. He said, my parents are too prejudiced. They don't understand why I decided to do this, why I want to work with foreign people. And so I'm going to Taiwan. Boarded up his suitcase. I drove him to LAX. He flew to Taiwan. He was trying in his own little way to break the barrier that unfortunately divides too many. Now, I could go to a lot more scriptures, but these three simply emphasize the point that there should be no distinctions made. None. I'm very close to Jacob Mashingeti. I heard somebody one time say to Jacob, well, Jacob, you don't understand because you're not black enough. And that's a direct quote. I about dropped my teeth. And he just started laughing. Jacob is from Zimbabwe. And he is my beloved brother in Christ. And I love him like my own child. And I thought, that was great. That was great. But the Bible's relevant there. But the Bible's relevant about human rights. People are screaming all the time about human rights, as well they should. And if we, what Christ taught in the Sermon on the Mount, you go over to Matthew, you drop down into the 7th chapter, and at verse 12, he's talking about, with regards to praying and things of that nature. And then he says, therefore, however you want people to treat you, stop. Ruminate on that for a minute. How do I want people to treat me? I want people to treat me with respect, with acceptance. That's how I want people to treat me. So because of that, that is how I have to treat them. Regardless. Look at the actual words. So treat them. Why? For this is the law and the prophets. Golden rule. So I know how I want to be treated. So conversely, I treat Austin the same way I want to be treated. Austin, the M&Ms are still on the shelf in my office. Help yourself. I want to be treated that way. I want to be treated jovially, respectfully. That's how I want to be treated. And if I don't treat you that way, then you need to call me on it. That you have that respect. And I'm going to treat you that way. Maybe not so much Randy. Randy's a good friend. Respect. That deals with human rights. Truly, it deals with human rights, treating others. But people probably want it to go into a more involved, elongated explanation. It doesn't need to be. It is simple. It is short. So just in a few verses, two major things that plague society have been dealt with. Sure, it means we're going to go against society. It means that we're going to stand out differently because no matter what happens, we're going to treat people this way. Look over to Romans 13 chapter, verse 10. Paul writes, trying to encourage the brethren therein. Love does no wrong. Okay, what is love? 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle, etc. But love means active goodwill. Active goodwill. I'm going to do the best for whoever I come in contact with. So love does no wrong. Then he specifies to a neighbor. All right. One side of my house is Ricardo. I very rarely see him, so I don't have to worry about showing love to him. My neighbor across the street, Roxy, she gets on her little scooter, and she's gone all the day. Beauty. I don't have to show love to them. Neighbor next door, yeah, never see them either. Oh, is that my neighbor? No. Neighbor is everyone you come in contact with. Love does no wrong to anyone. To anyone you come in contact with. It does no wrong. But he goes on. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. The absolute fulfillment of the law. So, human rights, dealt with. Racism, dealt with. It's really simple. And I mean that in all sincerity. But there are other areas that we have to consider. Security. Well, what about security? Security of a financial realm? Security of, well, physical security. You're there in Romans, 13th chapter. Go back and look at verse 1. Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities. Every government, number one thing the government's supposed to do is to provide security for the citizens, to preserve, to protect, to defend. That's in the oath of office that the president takes. He is the highest leader in the land. And then it begins to filter on down. But you can take a moment and just stop and look at where we are societally, politically. And I'm not a Republican. No, I'm not. And people ask me, and they go, well, you got to be a Republican. No. Then you're a Democrat. No. You're a libertarian. No. What are you? I'm an American. That's what I am. I'm a Bruce. I'm a Bruce. That's all I am. But remember when you went to high school and you went into high school civics and you were taught about our government? Oh, it was a great class. I had the opportunity to teach it one semester in New Mexico. And one of the things you were taught was how the various parts of our nation works. The judiciary, the executive, legislative. And you saw it. And it's all done and designed to provide us security. And so we look at it, we go, yeah. And those who founded our country founded it on principles found in the scriptures. Let's go on a little bit further. For there is no authority except from God. And those which exist are established by God. You can see various phraseologies of this in our documents. And declaration, easy for me to say, Constitution, Bill of Rights, and so on. Federalist Papers are amazing. They're not law, but they show the mindset of those who wrote the various articles. Verse 2, therefore he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have oppressed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. You want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good. You will have praise from the same. For it is the minister of God for you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath upon those who practice evil. Those that have governing authority, they protect us. They enact laws, pass sentence, bring about punishment for those who harm us. Yes, I realize things have changed. I know that. But if we would go back to the scriptures and look at the Bible, which has true relevance, we would see how things should be handled. Go to Ephesians 6, look at verses 1 through 4. It becomes even more apparent that where a lot of the respect starts is in the home, and what parents do with respect to their children. And I know there's been abject failure there. I know it. And because of that, children they're out of control. And it's not just boys. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more young women who are delinquent, who are perpetrating crimes, violent crimes. It begins in the home. The home is the foundation. We'll talk more about that this afternoon as we press on. But the Bible addresses security. It talks about it. And so if we would appeal to those that lead us and beg with them, get back to the principle. Follow the book that's relevant. Follow the teaching found therein. And therein will we succeed. And it amazes me that we were founded upon such principles, and as a nation we succeeded until such a time that we misplaced our ideals. Go to the book of 2 Thessalonians. Go into the 3rd chapter and drop down at verse 10. For even when we're with you, we used to give you this order. If anyone will not work, neither let him eat. Is the government to provide for us everything if we're not willing to work and labor? Well, we're going to leave it there and pick it up at that point this afternoon. And no, I'm not going to get into politics. I am talking a little tiny bit. I'm not going to support Democrat, Republican, or whatever. Just look at what the scriptures say. And the profundity of it, the absolute profundity, the simplicity of what it's about. And quite honestly, when you look at the Bible, it's really simple. Simple to understand, simple to apply. And would that more would look at it. But sadly, more and more are just throwing it off into the corner. And yes, I've gone into bookstores, and I love bookstores, and I find Bibles in the throw-out bin. We don't need these anymore. Throw them away. And so that day that I bought that one book I was telling you about, I picked up a couple of Bibles, different editions that I hadn't seen before. And they too were $2. People don't care. We're beginning to see more and more atheists More and more people that choose not to have any structure, any rule. And we wonder why things are the way they are. Hebrews 12th chapter talks about discipline. Yes, the Bible does discipline us. The Bible lays out what we should do, what we shouldn't do. It's very clear. Oh, what a wonderful world it would be if all would simply look to God in His Word. The lesson is yours this morning. But as with any lesson, we like to end with an invitation. And I recognize that in this lesson, we didn't talk a lot about Jesus Christ and Him crucified. But it is because of Him and the fact that He was crucified and resurrected that we have the Scriptures. He told the disciples, I'm going to go away. I'm going to be crucified. But we're not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to ask the Father, and He's going to send the Holy Spirit, who will guide you into all truth. What we have is all the truth, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual thought with spiritual words. Because Christ died, we have the word made more sure. Because Christ died, we have the chance at life eternal. Because Christ died, we have hope. And if you're here this morning and not a child of God, we'd love to sit down, study with you, show you what it would take to become a child of His. But maybe you already know what you need to do. You're willing to make your obedience complete. We would invite you to come while we stand and sing number 4.